In this short presentation, we'll be looking at the third content area in Topic 1, the foundations of education and care, and what constitutes the current Australian context. The complex foundations of Australia's history have had material effects on the current structure of our early years context. Some of these influences are obvious, such as the split between the compulsory and pre-compulsory sectors, and the different philosophical approaches taken in these sectors. Others, such as the origins of what we know as preschools and long day care centres, are not so well known. In this presentation, I'll take you through a chronological journey of the history of the early years sector, noting some significant events influencing contemporary education and care contexts. It's estimated that some 260 Aboriginal languages, representing 600 to 700 dialects, were spoken at the time when Australia was colonised by the British in 1778. In this pre-colonisation period, the education of and care of children was the responsibility of the biological parents and their extended family within the tribe. Aboriginal people view childhood as part of lifehood, encompassing all experiences and reality from the womb to the tomb. This worldview of childhood is significantly different to that of those who came to Australia in the First Fleet, and it's important for us as educators to be mindful of how the colonisation of Australia has been experienced by Aboriginal people both then and now. Karen Martin's chapter referenced here is an excellent resource for you to read more and start thinking about that. The establishment of penal colonies by the British in the late 1770s saw the introduction of Western, predominantly British structures, systems and ideologies to Australia. By 1800, the population of European children in New South Wales had increased from the 26 who arrived on the First Fleet to 725. The rapidly increasing population of children included deserted and orphaned children of the settlers, and displaced or dual heritage Aboriginal children. The destitution and poor health of many of these children led authorities and influential citizens of the day to consider them to be in dire need of care and protection. Consequently, three distinct responses to the provision of education and care emerged. The first was the establishment of school systems. The second, the introduction of kindergartens, and finally, the establishment of day nurseries. Each of these responses was influenced by dominant and at times competing views of childhood. The influence of these foundational institutions has had an enduring effect on policy and practice in early years education and care. In the earliest days of the colony, teachers, in inverted commas, established schools, again in inverted commas, to educate and care for the children of convicts, soldiers and free settlers. Sadly, not so much for the Aboriginal children. Those influenced by John Locke and the Reformation movement sought to save the delinquent child and instill good work habits, morals and self-respect, often through rewards and punishments. Others, influenced by Rousseau, Pestalozzi and Froebel, have more romantic notions of childhood, and they sought to educate by providing learning environments characterised by nurture, care and sensate experiences, while yet others seized the opportunity that arose to engage in the entrepreneurial endeavour of schoolkeeping. Few of these educators or teachers, if any, held formal qualifications. It was not until the 1830s that Governor Burke introduced the common school system that some unification around the schools and qualifications started to be discussed. However, the Protestant and Catholic churches met this move with strong opposition, as they'd already established a number of what was called denominational schools or church schools, and they weren't willing to relinquish these to the government. During this period, the school systems were essentially unregulated, and they enacted different curricula and were regularly attended by very young children. In 1880, at the instigation of Henry Parkes, the Public Instruction Act was passed, heralding three significant changes to the governance of schools. The first was the introduction of free, secular and compulsory education for all children between the ages of 6 to 14, and the second was the withdrawal of state aid to denominational schools. This was to have a significant effect in the landscape of education and care. Some of the denominational or church schools closed. The children who were going to schools who were under 6 were starting to not feel as welcome. In fact, in 1881, the year after the Act, a survey of ages of children in schools revealed that 20% of the schools of children at school were under the starting age of 6 years, and that some were as young as 3 years of age. These were often in specifically designated classes called infants classes. During the Depression of the 1890s, government expenditure on schools was cut dramatically, resulting in the exclusion of all children under the age of 6. This action was to have a significant impact on the evolution of programs for children under the age of 6. The Kindergarten Union of New South Wales was established in 1895, and by 1911 each state had a similar body in place. Inspired by similar movements in Europe and America, and following Froebel, concerned for the number of children left to their own devices in the streets of the slums, the Kindergarten Union set out implementing an agenda of social reform. The union aimed to set forth kindergarten principles, to endeavour to get those principles into every school in New South Wales and every other state, and to open free kindergartens wherever possible in poor neighbourhoods. These educational and philanthropic aspirations gained the patronage of the upper and educated classes of the states, who supported the contention that attendance at kindergartens run by refined and womanly women would counteract the bad habits and harmful things they learned in the streets. One of the first actions of the Kindergarten Union was to establish training programs for kindergarten teachers. These were often delivered by American-trained teachers, and they were very different to those of the teachers' colleges for schools in that they combined Froebelian developmental approach with the scientific studies of children. Kindergarten Union teachers were of the belief that school-based infants teachers were too focused on curriculum instruction and not focused enough on the development of the child. This divergence later led to the demise of the collaboration between the sectors. Kindergarten Union programs were in turn censured for their elitist approach, evidenced in the exclusion of children under 3 years of age, their operational hours from 9 a.m. to midday, and the recruitment of teachers, as they described as refined ladies. At this point in time, there were very few services to care for children under the age of 3. The 1904 Royal Commission recommended that creches be established to care for these very young children, particularly of working mothers. In 1905, the Sydney Day Nursery was established and was described as a place staffed by nurses and assistants with a matron in charge where children under school age, including babies of mothers in the paid workforce, were looked after for a small fee. The Sydney Day Nursery programs, and duplicated across all of the states, provided care and education for children from birth to 6 years of age. They were dedicated mainly to the health and development of the child and operated between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. to cater for the children of working parents. These services signified the birth of what we now know as long daycare services and were the first alternative pre-compulsory school service as an alternative for the Kindergarten Union run services across the states. Campaigning by the Kindergarten Union to implement kindergarten methods in schools included public meetings and lobbying with governments, and led in 1905 to the restructuring of schools in most of the states, In New South Wales, that was under the Director Peter Board, and who was also a patron of the Kindergarten Union. The first class, known as the infants class, was extended to 2 years to accept enrolments of children between the ages of 6 and 8 years. The teachers of these classes were to hold a 2-year certificate of training in kindergarten methods. In 1912, the New South Wales government sent a lecturer from the Sydney Teachers College to Rome to train with Montessori, and upon her return, the Montessori approach was widely implemented in the school system. By 1917, there were 70 kindergarten rooms in New South Wales implementing a blended curriculum based on Froebelian and Montessori methods. During this period, it's significant to note that all three providers of education and of early years education and care in New South Wales coexisted, united by the collaboration of patrons of the systems of the day. It's a very different context to that which we have now. The period following World War I and the subsequent Depression led to an unprecedented demand for children's services. The Kindergarten Union and Sydney and day nursery movements added meal and sleep programs in an effort to improve the health of the children. Some Kindergarten Union kindergartens extended their hours to accommodate this program. Though demand at the time was high, this period saw the advent of a duplication of services across the states. Philosophical discord and competition about the nature and purpose of education and care of children under school age between the day nursery and the kindergarten associations created tensions between the two institutions. In 1938, at the request of their patron Lady Gowrie, representatives from the kindergarten unions in each state convened to form the Australian Association for Preschool Child Development. The aims of this organisation were to coordinate the work of the 6 kindergarten unions, to set standards for the guidance for young children in nursery kindergartens, to set standards for the training of kindergarten teachers, and to establish a bureau of publications relating to preschool work, and to organise a conference biannually. This organisation later became 3 entities, or 3 iterations of entities: the Australian Preschool Association, the Australian Early Childhood Association, and what we now know as Early Childhood Australia. Adding to the tensions of the time was the institution of federally funded demonstration centres, where methods of care and instruction would be tested and demonstrated, and problems of physical growth, development and nutrition studied. The Australian Association for Preschool and Child Development was appointed to administrate and service these centres, which were named after Lady Gowrie, and you would still know those as the Gowrie Services. The Australian Association for Preschool Child Development was thus uniquely positioned, and some might say privileged, as having the first national governance or national federal coalition and influence in the provision of education and care for children in the prior to school sector. After World War II, the race to rebuild the economy, immigration of skilled workers from Europe, and ascent of political movements, including feminism, contributed to a new landscape of education and care. During this period, the Australian Association for Preschool Child Development and the New South Wales Kindergarten Union returned to their original agenda of providing education and care for children between the ages of 3 and 6 through preschool programs. Some kindergarten union programs even adopted features of the school system, including the adoption of school term dates, the leading of the term preschool in the literature and even in the names of their services, being to describe their preschool programs. By 1954, the Australian Association for Preschool Child Development had become the Australian Preschool Association, which is cementing that focus on preschool programs. They espoused the view, influenced by the work of Bowlby's studies of childhood and development and maternal deprivation, that it was undesirable for children under 3 to be in groups or out of home care. This sentiment placed preschools at odds with the long daycare services and the day nurseries, and that continued to provide programs for the children of working mothers. During the 1960s, the preschool movement gathered momentum and programs moved further from the original philanthropic aims of social reform expressed by the Kindergarten Union to the provision of preschool education. Nationally, the demand for preschool programs, influenced by research that supported links between early years education and subsequent success at school, such as the Head Start program in the United States, was increasing. Each state approached this a little differently. In New South Wales, the Labor government of the time opposed the state provision of preschool services and thus provided the lowest level of assistance of all of the states at the time. Again, during this time, tensions between the services in the prior to school sector grew. Feminism and employer groups supported parents in their demand for a greater range of childcare services. However, it was not until 1972 that the Commonwealth Government introduced the Child Care Act, which provided for increased childcare places to enable mothers to return to the workforce. Wages for qualified staff were subsidised according to an agreed ratio to ensure quality care. Recurrent grants were also provided to subsidise fees for low-income families and to establish community-based not-for-profit services. By 1974, the dichotomy between education and care came to a head when two separate reports on education and care in the prior to school sector emerged. The Fry report recommended that preschool services be expanded under the education departments, and the Coleman report recommended that services be provided by the Department of Social Security. In 1976, the Fraser federal government established the Office of Childcare and withdrew federal funding for preschools and, which according to Brennan, re-established and indeed cemented the division between education and care services for children below school age. During this turbulent period, schools continued to provide programs for children eligible to attend in both public and private systems. These deep-seated epistemological differences on the prior to school and school sectors continue to resonate in current debates in early years education. Teachers' constructs of the purposes and nature of education are influenced by their own education experience and the sector in which they work. In 1974, teachers' colleges were detached from state education departments to form autonomous tertiary institutions called Colleges of Advanced Education. In 1988, under the unified national system, they became universities. The current minimum qualification delivered by universities for prospective school teachers or teachers is a Bachelor of Education. Most teachers working in schools in New South Wales until recent times will have gone through programs informed by foundational theories such as Locke, Skinner and Kohlberg, advocating behavioural outcomes-driven pedagogy in formal or structured learning environments. Teachers in the prior to school sector, or early childhood programs, are now required to have one or more of the following qualifications: a Bachelor of Education, a Diploma of Community Services, or an Advanced Diploma of Community Services. Now, these programs have traditionally been informed by foundational theories of Froebel, Pestalozzi, Piaget, advocating child-centred, play-based, developmentally appropriate pedagogy within unstructured learning environments. Theoretical foundations shaped through teacher education and the curriculum teachers enact and the context in which they all work play a part in the discontinuities experienced by children as they move from one sector to the other, and that differs from state to state. Just trying to make the point here that the teachers who may be early years educators in the school sector might have a very different teacher education background to some of those who would have been trained in the prior to school sector, and that now with the National Early Years Workforce Strategy, we have programs such as the one that you're enrolled in, which cover birth to 12. So it's a very, very different context. Historical processes generate subjective meanings, and these can be taken up systemically, either in policy or practice, or just as accepted norms and practices. When these subjectivities are made visible through critical reflection, new beliefs, policies, and practices can be enacted. The historical processes that have been detailed in this presentation inform the subjectivities held by teachers in the prior to school and school sectors that impact on their views of the nature and purpose of education and care. I hope that this narrative has helped you to see some of the influences of the past on our present, and help you in some way contextualise the philosophical differences and some of the tensions informing the complex context of Australian early years education and care. Indeed, my hope is that you'll have been challenged and motivated to learn more about the complexity of this context by following up some of the additional resources and links on the website.